I knew my life was over the moment I saw Olivia smile at another man like I didn't exist. I stood across the street, frozen, my breath shallow, my chest tight, watching her lean closer to Ryan Mitchell outside that hotel. "You're overthinking this," she said softly to him, her voice the same one she used when calming me down. Ryan laughed. "Then stop pretending you don't want it." I felt something break inside me, but I didn't move. I didn't shout. I didn't even blink. "Just tonight," Olivia whispered, and those two words echoed louder than anything else. My fingers tightened into fists. "So that's it," I murmured to myself. 3 years, gone in one night. I should have walked away, but I couldn't. I kept watching as they walked inside together. "Don't do this," I whispered under my breath, even though I knew she already had. My phone buzzed suddenly, pulling me out of that moment. "Jason, where are you?" Emma Collins' voice came through. I swallowed hard. "Out," I said. "Just needed air." "You sound off," she replied. "Are you okay?" I stared at the hotel doors. "Yeah," I lied. "I'm fine." But I wasn't. Not even close. I stayed there longer than I should have, long enough to understand one thing clearly: I had just lost everything, and she didn't even know I was there to see it happen. I don't remember how I got home, but I remember the silence. It felt heavier than anything I had ever carried. I sat on the couch, staring at nothing, replaying that moment over and over. Why didn't I stop her? I muttered. Why didn't I say something? The answers came slowly, painfully. Because if I had, I would have lost control. And right now, control was the only thing I had left. The door clicked open around 2 in the morning. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe differently. "Jason." Olivia's voice was soft, careful. I kept my eyes closed. "Are you asleep?" she asked. I heard her footsteps get closer. "You look tired," she whispered, like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just destroyed everything. I wanted to open my eyes. I wanted to ask her why. Instead, I stayed still. Good, I thought. Keep pretending. She stood there for a moment longer before walking away. "You don't know," I whispered in my mind. And that's exactly how I want it. That was the moment I made my decision. I wasn't going to confront her. I wasn't going to beg or break down. I was going to wait. And when I moved, it would matter. The next morning, she acted normal, like the night before never existed. "Good morning," she said with a smile, placing a cup of coffee in front of me. I looked at her, really looked at her, searching for guilt, regret, anything. "Morning," I replied calmly. "You came home late." She shrugged. "Work ran long." I nodded slowly. "Must have been exhausting." She smiled again. "You have no idea." I almost laughed at how easily she lied. "Yeah," I said, taking a sip. "I can imagine." She studied me for a second. "You're quiet today." "Just thinking," I replied. "About what?" she asked. I leaned back. "The future." Her eyes lit up slightly. "Ours?" I held her gaze for a moment before nodding. "Yeah, ours." The word felt wrong, like it didn't belong anymore. "I might have more late nights this week," she added casually. "Big projects." "Of course you do," I thought. "No problem," I said. "Do what you need to do." She smiled, satisfied, like everything was under control. "You're the best," she said softly. I forced a small smile. "I know." But inside, something had shifted completely. I wasn't the same man sitting across from her anymore. And she had no idea. At work, I kept my head down, avoiding unnecessary conversations, focusing on anything that could distract me. But Mark Reynolds noticed. "You look like hell," he said, leaning against my desk. "Rough night?" I shrugged. "Didn't sleep much." He crossed his arms. "That's not what I meant." I sighed. "Then what did you mean?" He studied me closely. "Something's off. You're not yourself." I hesitated. For a second, I almost told him everything. "It's nothing," I said finally. "Just stress." He didn't look convinced. "If something's wrong, you should deal with it before it gets worse." I nodded slowly. "I will. But not the way you think." After he walked away, I leaned back in my chair. "Deal with it," I repeated under my breath. "Yeah, I will." My phone rang suddenly, the number unfamiliar. "Jason Carter?" A calm, authoritative voice said when I answered. "Yes." "This is Victor Langston." I sat up straight immediately. "I heard about your recent work," he continued. "You have potential. I'd like to meet." My heart started racing, but not because of fear. Because of opportunity. "When?" I asked. "Tonight," he replied. "If you're serious." I didn't hesitate. "I'll be there." The call ended and I stared at my phone. This changes things, I whispered. Suddenly, my world didn't feel like it was falling apart anymore. It felt like it was shifting. That night, Olivia sat beside me on the couch, scrolling through her phone like everything was normal. "You've been distant," she said casually. "Have I?" I replied. She glanced at me. "Yeah. It's weird." I shrugged. "Just thinking about work." "You should relax," she said. "You're overworking yourself." I almost smiled at that. "Maybe." She leaned closer. "We should do something this weekend." I turned to her. "What did you have in mind?" She paused like she was calculating something. "I don't know, maybe dinner, just us." "Just us." The irony almost made me laugh. "Sounds good," I said calmly. She smiled, satisfied again. "Good. I miss this." I looked at her, really looked this time, and all I felt was distance. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Me too." But that wasn't true. I didn't miss this. I didn't miss her. I missed who I thought she was. My phone buzzed again, a message confirming my meeting with Victor. I glanced at it, then back at Olivia. "Everything okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah. More than okay." Because now I knew something she didn't. This wasn't the end of my story. This was the beginning of something else. And while she thought she was in control, she had already lost. The moment I realized Olivia was pregnant, my entire world didn't just crack, it went completely silent. Not the peaceful kind of silence. The kind that screams inside your head while everything outside looks normal. "You okay?" Olivia asked that morning, standing in front of me like nothing had changed. I looked at her, searching her face. "Yeah," I said calmly. "Why?" She smiled slightly. "You've just been distant." I leaned back in my chair. "Work's been heavy." Another lie. But this time it felt easier. "You should take a break," she said softly. I nodded. "Maybe." But inside I was already connecting pieces. The late nights. The hidden calls. The way she avoided eye contact sometimes. It all made sense now. I just didn't have proof yet. And I needed proof. Not for her, but for me. "I'll be late again tonight," she added casually. I held her gaze for a second. "Of course you will," I thought. But out loud I said, "No problem." She smiled again, relaxed. She really believed I didn't know. And that was my biggest advantage. That evening I followed her again. Not because I wanted to catch her, but because I needed confirmation. I stayed far enough so she wouldn't notice. She walked into a small cafe this time, not a hotel. I stopped outside, my heart steady, my mind clear. "You're getting better at this," I muttered to myself. I moved closer just enough to hear. "Ryan, this is getting complicated," Olivia said, her voice low but tense. "Relax," Ryan replied. "We'll figure it out." "You don't understand," she said. "I can't keep doing this." I clenched my jaw. "Then stop," I whispered under my breath. But she didn't. "I'm late," she said suddenly. My body froze. "Late?" Ryan asked. "What do you mean?" There was a pause. A long one. "I took a test," she said quietly. "It's positive." Everything inside me went cold. "You're pregnant?" Ryan asked, surprised but not panicked. "Yeah," she replied. Silence filled the air between them. "Are you sure it's mine?" he asked bluntly. That question hit harder than anything else. Olivia hesitated. "It has to be," she said. I closed my eyes for a second. That was it. That was the truth I needed. And it wasn't mine. I stepped back slowly, my mind racing but my body calm. "So this is how it ends," I whispered. Not with a fight. Not with tears. Just clarity. I didn't go inside. I didn't confront her. Because now I knew everything. And knowing gave me power. I walked away before they could come out, before I could lose control. "Stay calm," I told myself. "Don't ruin this." That night she came home like usual. "Hey," she said softly. "You're still up?" I nodded, sitting on the couch. "Yeah." She looked tired. "Long day," she added. I studied her face carefully. "I can see that," I replied. She sat beside me. "You've been quiet lately," she said again. I shrugged. "Just thinking." "About what?" she asked. I looked at her for a moment. "About how things change," I said slowly. She frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" I shook my head. "Nothing important." She relaxed again. "You worry too much," she said. "If only you knew," I thought. If only you knew how much had already changed. The next day I started digging. Not emotionally, strategically. "Ryan Mitchell," I said quietly, typing his name into my laptop. Information started appearing quickly. Business deals. Investments. Connections. You're not as clean as you look, I murmured. The more I searched, the more I found. Interesting, I said, leaning back. There were cracks. Small ones, but enough. Everyone has weaknesses, I whispered. I just had to find his. Mark walked by my desk and stopped. You look focused today, he said. New project. I glanced at him. Something like that. He nodded. Good. You needed that. If only he knew. Yeah, I said. I really did. After he left, I checked my phone. A message popped up. Unknown number. I opened it. Tonight. 8 p.m. Don't be late. Victor Langston. I stared at the screen. So it begins, I whispered. This wasn't just about Olivia anymore. This was bigger. Much bigger. That evening, I stood outside the building Victor had sent me. My reflection stared back at me in the glass doors. You're not the same person anymore, I told myself quietly. And I wasn't. The man who stood outside that hotel days ago, he was gone. Inside I felt something new. Control. Calm. Purpose. My phone buzzed again. Olivia. I looked at the screen for a second before answering. Hey, I said. Where are you? She asked. Out, I replied. Work stuff. She paused. You've been busy lately. Yeah, I said. Trying to improve things. For us? She asked softly. I almost smiled. Yeah, I said. For us. But the truth was different now. There was no us. There was only me, and the plan I was starting to build. I'll see you later, she said. Take care. You too, I replied before hanging up. I slipped my phone into my pocket and walked inside. For the first time since everything started, I didn't feel like I was losing. The moment I stepped into Victor Langston's office, I knew this wasn't just a meeting, it was a test. You're Jason Carter, Victor said without looking up, his voice calm but sharp. Yes, I replied, keeping my tone steady. He finally looked at me, studying me like he already knew everything. You look like a man carrying something heavy, he said. I didn't react. Everyone carries something, I answered. He smiled slightly. Good. You didn't deny it. I stayed silent. He leaned back in his chair. Tell me something, he continued. When life hits you hard, do you break or do you adapt? I held his gaze. I adapt. He nodded slowly. We'll see. That single sentence felt like a challenge. Sit, he said, gesturing toward the chair. I sat down, keeping my posture straight. I've heard about your work, he said. You're consistent, quiet, observant. I didn't interrupt. Those are rare qualities, he added. Especially the last one. I exhaled slowly. Observation teaches more than reaction, I said. He raised an eyebrow. Interesting. Most people react first and regret later. I didn't respond. Because that used to be me. Not anymore. Victor stood up and walked toward the window. Let me ask you something else, he said. What motivates you right now? I thought about Olivia. About Ryan. About everything that had happened. But I didn't say their names. Growth, I replied simply. He turned back to me. That's a safe answer. I nodded. It's also the truth. He studied me for a moment. People like you, he said slowly, usually come with a reason. Something pushing them. I stayed quiet. He stepped closer. You don't have to tell me, he added. But I can tell it's there. I met his eyes. Does it matter? He smiled faintly. Not to me. What matters is what you do with it. I nodded. I plan to use it. He chuckled softly. Good. Because emotions, if uncontrolled, will destroy you. I already knew that. And if controlled? I asked. His expression sharpened. They become your greatest weapon. That sentence stayed with me. Weapon. That's exactly what I needed. Not revenge driven by anger, but something calculated. Something precise. I can offer you an opportunity, Victor said, walking back to his desk. But I don't offer opportunities to people who can't control themselves. I leaned forward slightly. I won't waste it. He looked at me carefully. We'll see. The next few days changed everything. I started working under Victor, learning how to see things differently. You're thinking too small, he said during one meeting. Expand your view. I frowned slightly. I'm focusing on the details. He shook his head. Details matter, but strategy matters more. I nodded. Understood. He watched me for a second. You're learning fast. I allowed a small breath. I have a reason to. He didn't ask what that reason was. He didn't need to. At the same time, Olivia became more comfortable around me. "You've been doing well lately," she said one evening, sitting next to me. "Work's been good." I nodded. "Better than before." She smiled. "That's great. We should start thinking about bigger things." I looked at her. "Like what?" She hesitated slightly. "Our future." I kept my expression neutral. "What about it?" She leaned closer. "I think we're ready for something more serious." The irony almost made me laugh. "Serious?" I repeated. "Yeah," she said softly. "I don't want to stay stuck where we are." I studied her face carefully. "You don't?" I thought. "Because you already moved on." "We'll see," I said calmly. She smiled again, satisfied with that answer. But inside I understood her plan. She wanted security. She wanted control. And she thought she could manage both sides until the right moment. At work, Victor pushed me harder every day. "You hesitate too much," he said during another session. "Hesitation costs opportunities." I nodded. "I'm adjusting." He crossed his arms. "You need to stop thinking like someone who's afraid to lose." I looked at him. "What if I already lost?" He paused for a second. "Then you have nothing holding you back." That hit deeper than he realized. "Exactly," I said quietly. He studied me again. "You've changed," he noted. "Recently." I didn't deny it. Change was necessary. He nodded slowly. "Good. Because where you're going, the old version of you wouldn't survive." I felt something shift inside me. Confidence. Control. Focus. That same evening, Olivia sat across from me at dinner. "You're different," she said suddenly. "Am I?" I asked. She nodded. "Yeah. More distant." I shrugged. "Busy." She didn't look convinced. "You used to tell me everything." I met her eyes. "People change." She looked away for a moment. "I hope not too much." I almost smiled. "Don't worry," I said. "I'm still here." But that wasn't true. The version of me she knew was already gone. That night, I sat alone thinking about everything that had happened. "Control," I whispered to myself. "Patience." Victor's words echoed in my head. This wasn't about reacting anymore. This was about timing. Precision. Power. My phone buzzed. Olivia again. "Are you coming to bed?" she texted. I looked at the message for a moment before replying. "Soon." I leaned back in my chair. "You're planning something," I thought. "But so am I." And the difference was, she thought she was ahead. She thought I was still in the dark. But I wasn't. Not anymore. I stood up and walked toward the window, looking out at the city lights. "You wanted control," I whispered quietly. "You just don't know you gave it to me." For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel lost. I felt ready. Ready to build something stronger. Ready to move forward. And when the time came, ready to make my move. I smiled the morning Olivia kissed my cheek like nothing in our world had changed, and that was the moment I knew I had mastered the illusion. "You're in a good mood," she said, setting coffee in front of me. "Am I?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She nodded. "Yeah, you look relaxed." I took a sip and met her eyes. "Work's going well." That part was true. "That's good," she replied, studying me a second longer than usual. I held the smile, steady and controlled. "You worried about me?" I asked. She laughed softly. "No, just checking." I leaned back. "You don't have to check. I'm fine." Inside I wasn't fine, I was precise. Every word, every reaction measured. "I might be late again," she added casually. "Meetings." I nodded. "Of course." She relaxed instantly. That told me everything. She was watching me, testing me. And I was passing every test without giving her anything real. Later that day, I sat in a conference room with people I never imagined I'd meet. "Jason, this is Sophia Langston," Victor said. I stood and nodded. "Nice to meet you." Sophia smiled politely. "I've heard a lot about you." I glanced at Victor. "Only good things, I hope." Victor smirked. "That depends on how you perform." I didn't react. Sophia noticed. "You're calm," she said. "Most people aren't in their first meeting here." I folded my hands. "Calm is easier than nervous." She tilted her head slightly. "Or maybe you're hiding something." I held her gaze. "Everyone hides something." Victor chuckled. "He learns fast." The meeting moved quickly, numbers, strategies, decisions. I listened more than I spoke, just like Victor taught me. "What do you think?" Victor asked suddenly. All eyes turned to me. I didn't rush. "There's a gap in the plan," I said. Ryan Mitchell's side is overextended. If pressure is applied at the right point, it'll crack. The room went quiet. Victor smiled slowly. Exactly. Sophia looked impressed. You've done your homework. I nodded once. I had a reason to. That evening, Olivia sat beside me, closer than usual. You've been different, she said softly. Better or worse? I asked. She hesitated. Different. I turned slightly toward her. You don't like different? She shook her head. I didn't say that. I watched her carefully. Then what are you saying? She looked down for a second. I just don't want to lose what we have. I almost laughed at that, but I didn't. You won't, I said calmly. She leaned into me like she needed reassurance. I've been thinking, she continued, maybe we should take things to the next level. I kept my expression neutral. What does that mean? She smiled faintly. Something more serious? Commitment. I nodded slowly. That's a big step. She looked at me, searching my face. Do you want that? I held her gaze. I want stability. That answer satisfied her. It wasn't love. It wasn't truth. But it was enough. And that's all she needed right now. At work, Victor pushed harder than ever. You're improving, he said, watching me review data. But you're still holding back. I didn't look up. I'm being careful. He shook his head. Careful is good. Fear is not. I finally met his eyes. I'm not afraid. He studied me. Good. Because Ryan Mitchell is already starting to feel pressure. I leaned back slightly. From where? Victor smiled faintly. From people he didn't expect. I understood immediately. And he doesn't see me, I said. Exactly, Victor replied. He sees you as irrelevant. I nodded. That works for me. Victor stepped closer. Then use it. People lose when they underestimate the wrong person. I felt something settle inside me. He already has, I said quietly. Later, Mark stopped by my desk. You're on fire lately, he said. What changed? I shrugged. Focus. He frowned slightly. That's not all. I gave a small smile. Sometimes it's enough. He didn't push further. But I could tell, people were starting to notice. That night, Olivia stood by the window looking thoughtful. Can I ask you something? She said. Of course. She turned to face me. Where do you see us in a year? I walked closer, stopping just enough to keep distance. Why now? I asked. She crossed her arms lightly. Because I need to know. I studied her expression carefully. There was urgency there. Pressure. I see us stable, I said. Stronger. She nodded slowly. That's what I want too. I watched her for a moment longer. Then we're on the same page. She smiled, relieved. Good. She stepped closer, but I didn't move. Inside, everything was already clear. She was preparing. Trying to secure her position before the truth came out. But I wasn't going to stop her. I wasn't going to confront her. I was going to let it all play out exactly as it was heading. As she walked away, I turned toward the window, looking at the city lights. Keep going, I whispered under my breath. Build your illusion. Because mine was already perfect. And when everything finally collapsed, I wouldn't even need to push. The first crack showed in Olivia's voice before it showed in her actions. Jason, can we talk? She asked one evening, standing near the doorway like she wasn't sure if she should come closer. I looked up from my laptop. We're already talking, I said calmly. She hesitated, then walked in. I mean, seriously talk. I leaned back in my chair. About what? She crossed her arms lightly. About us. I held her gaze, giving her nothing. What about us? She frowned. Why are you acting like everything is fine? I almost smiled. Because everything looks fine. That answer didn't satisfy her. You've been distant, she said. Different. I shrugged. People change. She stepped closer. Not like this. I studied her face. There was pressure. Small but growing. Then tell me what you want me to say, I replied quietly. She opened her mouth, then stopped. I don't know, she admitted. Exactly, I thought. You don't know anymore. And that uncertainty was the beginning of everything falling apart. At work, things moved faster than I expected. You're ready, Victor said, handing me a file. I looked at it briefly. For what? He leaned against the desk. For responsibility. Real responsibility. I flipped through the pages. Numbers. Contracts. Connections. This puts me in control, I said. He nodded. That's the point. I met his eyes. And Ryan Mitchell? Victor smiled faintly. Already slipping. I felt a quiet satisfaction settle in. How bad? I asked. Bad enough, he replied. He stretched too thin. One push in the right place. He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. I understood. And you want me to make that push? I asked. Victor crossed his arms. I want you to decide if you're ready. I didn't hesitate. I am. He watched me carefully. Then don't rush it. Precision matters. I nodded. I know. Because this wasn't just business. This was personal. And I wasn't going to make mistakes. That night, Olivia sat across from me at dinner, unusually quiet. You've been busy, she said finally. Work's demanding, I replied. She nodded slowly. That's good. I took a sip of water. You sound unsure. She looked down at her plate. I just don't know where things are going anymore. I set the glass down. You wanted things to change. She looked up quickly. I didn't mean like this. I tilted my head slightly. Then how did you mean? She hesitated again. I thought we'd be closer. I almost laughed, but I didn't. Closer? I repeated. Yeah, she said softly. Not like strangers. I leaned back. Maybe we're just seeing things clearly now. That hit her harder than I expected. What does that mean? She asked. I held her gaze. It means sometimes things aren't what we thought they were. Silence filled the space between us. She looked like she wanted to say something else, but didn't. And that silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. The next few days I made my moves carefully. This account connects directly to Ryan, I said, pointing at the screen. Victor nodded. And if it collapses? I looked at him. Everything else follows. He smiled slightly. Good. I leaned forward. We apply pressure here, I continued, and here. Not enough to expose us, but enough to destabilize him. Victor watched me closely. You've changed, he said again. You keep saying that, I replied. He shook his head. Because it's true. I paused for a moment. Change was necessary. He nodded. Then don't lose control now. I smirked faintly. I won't. Because this wasn't about anger anymore. It was about outcome. Later Mark approached me again. You're moving fast, he said. You sure about this? I looked at him. I've never been more sure. He frowned slightly. Just don't burn yourself out. I gave a small nod. I won't. But he didn't understand. This wasn't pressure to me. This was clarity. When I got home, Olivia was already waiting. We need to talk, she said again, more serious this time. I closed the door behind me. We already did. She shook her head. No, not like this. I walked past her and set my keys down. Then say what you need to say. She turned toward me. I feel like I'm losing you. I stopped for a second, then turned back slowly. Are you? I asked. She stared at me, searching for something in my face. I don't know, she whispered. I stepped closer, just enough to close the distance but not enough to feel anything. Then maybe you should figure that out, I said calmly. Her eyes softened, almost like she was about to confess something. But she didn't. Not yet. And that told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't ready to face the truth. But it was already catching up to her. I walked past her again, heading toward the window. Jason, she said softly. I didn't turn around. Yeah, I replied. There was a long pause before she spoke. Nothing. I smiled faintly to myself. The truth wasn't hidden anymore. It was cracking. And soon, it would break completely. Jason, I'm pregnant. Olivia's voice didn't shake the way I expected. It was careful. Controlled. Like she had rehearsed that moment 100 times before saying it out loud. I stood still, my back half turned toward her, my hand resting on the edge of the table. For a second I said nothing. Not because I was shocked. Not because I didn't understand. But because I wanted to see what she would do with my silence. Say something, she added, her voice tighter now. I turned slowly, meeting her eyes. Okay, I said calmly. Her expression shifted instantly. Okay, she repeated. I nodded once. Yeah. Okay. She blinked, clearly thrown off. That's it. I leaned slightly against the table. What were you expecting? She stepped closer. Jason, I just told you I'm pregnant. I held her gaze. I heard you. She searched my face desperately. You're not going to ask anything? I tilted my head slightly. Like what? Her breathing changed. Like, whose it is? There it was. I almost smiled. Do you want me to ask? I replied quietly. She froze for a second. Jason, I cut her off gently. It's not mine. The silence that followed was heavier than anything before. Olivia took a step back like I had just hit her without touching her. "You knew?" she whispered. I nodded. For a while. Her eyes widened. "And you didn't say anything?" I shrugged slightly. What was there to say? She stared at me, trying to understand something that no longer existed. "Why didn't you confront me?" she asked, her voice breaking. I looked at her calmly. "Because I didn't need to." That answer confused her even more. "Jason, this isn't something small," she said, her tone rising. "I know," I replied. "That's why I didn't rush it." She shook her head. "I don't understand you." I exhaled slowly. "You don't have to." She stepped closer again, desperation creeping in. "I was going to tell you," she said quickly. "I just needed time." I nodded. "Of course you did." "You think I'm lying?" she said. I met her eyes. "I think you were deciding." That hit her harder than anything else. "Deciding what?" she asked. I didn't hesitate. "Whether I was still useful to you." She went silent again. And this time, she didn't have an answer. My phone buzzed on the table, breaking the tension. I glanced down at the screen. "Victor." I picked it up without urgency. "Yeah," I said. "It's done," Victor's voice came through. "Ryan Mitchell just lost his biggest contract." I looked at Olivia for a second before turning slightly away. "How bad?" I asked. "Bad enough that he won't recover quickly," Victor replied. "And the rest?" I asked. "Already reacting," he said. "Investors are pulling back." I nodded. "Good." Olivia watched me closely. "What's going on?" she asked when I ended the call. I slipped my phone back into my pocket. "Nothing that concerns you," I replied. That wasn't entirely true. It concerned her more than she realized. She frowned. "Jason, what are you doing?" I looked at her calmly. "Working." She shook her head. "No, this isn't just work." I stepped closer, my voice still steady. "You're right." Her eyes locked onto mine. "Then what is it?" I paused for a second. "It's timing." She didn't understand. But she would. Later that night, my phone rang again. This time it wasn't Victor. "Jason Carter." Ryan's voice came through, sharp and strained. "We need to talk." I leaned back in my chair. "About what?" I asked. "You know exactly what," he snapped. I almost laughed. "Do I?" There was a pause on the other end. "Stay out of my business," he said. I smirked slightly. "Your business?" I repeated. "You mean the one that's falling apart?" His breathing grew heavier. "This is your doing." I tilted my head. "You're giving me too much credit." "Don't play games with me," he said angrily. "You think I don't see what's happening?" I leaned forward slightly. "Then stop it," I replied calmly. "Fix it." He went quiet for a second. "You're going to regret this," he said finally. I shook my head. "No," I said. "I'm really not." I ended the call before he could say anything else. Across the room, Olivia stood frozen, listening to every word. "Jason," she whispered. I looked at her. "Now you're starting to see it," I said quietly. The next day, everything came out publicly. News spread fast. Ryan Mitchell's company facing major losses. Investors withdrawing support. Internal instability reported. I watched it all unfold without reacting. Olivia stood behind me, staring at the screen. This can't be happening," she said softly. I didn't turn around. "It is," I replied. She stepped closer. "You did this." I shrugged slightly. "I didn't force him into bad decisions." She shook her head. "No, but you pushed him." I turned to face her. "Just enough." Tears filled her eyes. "Why?" she asked. I looked at her calmly. "Because actions have consequences." She broke then. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, her voice shaking. "I didn't think it would go this far." I nodded slowly. "That's the problem." She stepped closer, almost reaching for me. "Jason, please, we can fix this." I looked at her hand, then back at her face. "There's nothing to fix," I said quietly. She froze again. "You're not even angry," she whispered. I shook my head. "I don't need to be." And that was the truth. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to shout or break anything. Because everything had already broken on its own. And I was just standing there, watching it fall. The last time I saw Olivia standing in that apartment, she looked smaller than I remembered, like everything she once controlled had slipped through her hands. "Jason, please just talk to me," she said, her voice soft but desperate. I stood near the door, my keys already in my hand. "We've talked enough," I replied calmly. She shook her head. No, we haven't. You haven't said anything real. I looked at her for a moment. That's because there's nothing left to say. Her eyes filled with tears. You're just going to walk away? I nodded once. Yeah. She stepped closer. After everything? I met her gaze. Because of everything. That difference mattered. She searched my face like she was trying to find the version of me she used to control. I made a mistake, she whispered. I exhaled slowly. You made a choice. That hit harder. Jason, she tried again. I raised my hand slightly, stopping her. You don't need to explain it anymore. And for the first time, I meant it completely. I walked out without looking back, and the silence that followed didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt clean. My phone buzzed as I stepped outside. You done? Victor's voice came through. Yeah, I replied. Completely? He asked. I looked up at the sky for a second. Completely. He paused. Good. Then we move forward. I nodded. What's next? Victor's tone shifted slightly. Expansion. Bigger responsibilities. Bigger decisions. I smiled faintly. Sounds right. He chuckled. You've come a long way, Jason. I thought about that for a second. I had to. He didn't argue. Come by tomorrow, he said. We'll discuss your next position. I ended the call and slipped my phone into my pocket. For the first time in weeks, I felt light. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was clear. A few days later, I ran into Mark at the office. You look different, he said immediately. I smirked slightly. Everyone keeps saying that. He shook his head. No, I mean it. You look settled. I leaned against my desk. Maybe I am. He studied me. Whatever was bothering you, it's gone? I paused for a moment. It's handled. He raised an eyebrow. Handled how? I gave a small shrug. Quietly. He laughed lightly. I don't know if that's impressive or scary. I smiled faintly. Depends on how you look at it. He nodded. Fair enough. After he walked away, I glanced at my reflection in the glass window. He was right. I did look different. Not because I had changed completely, but because I had learned control. And that changed everything. Later that week, news about Ryan continued spreading. More losses reported. Key partners withdrawing. Uncertain future ahead. I watched it all without emotion. You're really not reacting at all? Sophia asked, standing beside me. I glanced at her. Should I? She crossed her arms slightly. Most people would. I looked back at the screen. Most people react too late. She studied me for a second. You planned this. I didn't confirm it. I didn't deny it. Things unfold the way they're meant to, I said instead. She smiled faintly. That's one way to put it. I turned slightly toward her. It's the only way that matters. She nodded slowly. You're not who you were before. I met her eyes. No, and I didn't regret that. That night, I stood by the window in my new apartment, looking out at the city lights. Everything felt different, but not in a chaotic way, in a controlled way. My phone buzzed again. A message from Olivia. I'm sorry. I understand now. I stared at it for a few seconds before locking the screen. No reply. No reaction. Because I didn't need one. I had already moved on. Silence, I whispered to myself, was never weakness. It was power. The kind that doesn't need validation. The kind that doesn't need noise. I took a slow breath and stepped back from the window. My future wasn't tied to what happened anymore. It was built on what I chose next. And for the first time, I wasn't reacting to life. I was directing it.